I never meant to read it, but the moment I touched her diary, she caught me, and smiled. It was one of those quiet afternoons where the apartment felt suspended in a golden haze, sunlight spilling lazily across the floor. I had been tidying up, moving things from one shelf to another, when a small, leather-bound book slipped out from beneath a stack of magazines. Its cover was soft, worn at the edges, faintly scented with something sweet and familiar, her perfume, maybe, or the lingering warmth of her presence. My fingers hesitated over it, tracing the curve of the binding as if touching it would somehow reveal secrets before even opening it. Curiosity gnawed at me, a subtle, almost guilty thrill. I knew I shouldn't, that boundaries existed for a reason, yet the temptation pressed against the edge of my mind. The way it lay there, understated and intimate, made it feel like it had been waiting for me to notice. My heart thumped unevenly, not just from the thrill of discovery, but from the quiet sense of connection it promised, a glimpse into the thoughts and feelings she kept private. I lifted the diary slowly, my hands lingering on the cover, inhaling the faint scent that clung to it. There was a weight to it, a kind of gravity that made me pause, reminding me this wasn't just any book. It belonged to her, carried fragments of her life, her memories, the raw edges of her emotions. And yet, something about it called to me, whispered that I could understand her better if I just dared to look inside. I pressed my fingers against the leather, tracing the initials engraved on the corner, feeling the smooth texture against my skin. My chest tightened slightly, a mix of excitement and trepidation. Every fiber of me wanted to peek, to read a word, just one, to understand the rhythm of her thoughts, the cadence of her quiet moments. There was a faint thrill in imagining the words she had written in solitude, words that revealed a side of her no one else ever saw. And then my mind flickered with doubt. Respect. Boundaries. What if she caught me? The very thought made my pulse race, but the temptation lingered, curling stubbornly around my thoughts. I shifted slightly, the leather warm under my touch, feeling the diary almost like a living thing, soft, intimate, and patient. I imagined her there, somewhere in the apartment, or perhaps just outside my awareness, a presence as tangible as the light spilling across the floor, watching, waiting. For a long moment, I froze, fingertips hovering, caught between curiosity and conscience. The world seemed to narrow down to the diary in my hands, the quiet hum of the room, and the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat. Something told me that opening it would change things, that one small act of curiosity could unravel layers of unspoken connection between us. And yet, I couldn't stop myself. The diary felt impossibly close, intimate and alluring. I exhaled, heart hammering, knowing that the next second could tip the delicate balance of our relationship forever. Little did I know, she was closer than I realized, ready to catch me in that suspended moment between temptation and trust. The quiet tension in the room snapped like a fragile thread the instant she appeared. One step, a soft shuffle across the floor, and I realized too late that I hadn't been alone. The diary, my forbidden curiosity, still rested in my hands, and suddenly, it felt impossibly heavy. My fingers tightened around the leather, as though holding it could somehow hide my guilt, but there was no hiding from her. She leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, one eyebrow slightly raised, a smile teasing at the corners of her lips. There was no anger there, only an amused curiosity that made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't expected. Her eyes, warm and sharp at once, seemed to see through the half-hearted excuses I hadn't even voiced. I froze, caught in a moment that felt suspended between shame and fascination, the diary trembling slightly under my grip. "You found it," she said softly, voice calm but with a playful edge. "And yet, here you are, hesitating." The words weren't a reprimand, they were an invitation, a challenge wrapped in warmth. My heart thudded loudly, betraying me. I could almost feel her presence pressing gently against the space around me, a subtle gravity pulling at my chest. I swallowed, the sudden dryness in my mouth making my tongue feel thick. My hands shifted the diary nervously, fingertips brushing the cover as though it were some fragile treasure I wasn't allowed to touch. She stepped a little closer, just enough that I could feel the faint heat of her body through the thin fabric of my shirt. The subtle scent of her perfume, or maybe it was just the lingering trace from the diary itself, wrapped around me, dizzying and intimate. Her gaze didn't waver. "Go on," she said lightly, "read it, if you dare." There was no pressure, only that teasing warmth that made my pulse spike and my mind spin. The diary in my hands suddenly felt less like an object and more like a bridge. One small step across it and I would be drawn closer to her, closer to something I didn't entirely understand yet. I realized my fingers were trembling, not from fear, but from the strange mix of excitement and hesitation swirling in my chest. Every instinct screamed to retreat, to put the diary down and pretend this never happened. And yet, every thought of her, her knowing smile, the tilt of her head, the soft curve of her shoulders as she leaned lightly against the doorframe, pulled me forward. Time seemed to stretch, each second heavy with possibility. I was aware of my own heartbeat, the warmth radiating from her proximity, and the quiet, almost imperceptible pause in the room that made everything else fade. My eyes flicked to hers, searching for a clue, a hint of what she might feel, but all I saw was patience, playfulness, and the subtle promise of trust. And then I knew, I couldn't resist. The diary, the secret, the curiosity, and the pull between us all converged in one undeniable truth: I was about to cross a line I hadn't dared approach before. She wasn't just catching me in the act, she was inviting me in. Her presence felt closer now, not intrusive, but magnetic, as though the air between us had been charged with an unspoken understanding. I held the diary tightly, feeling the weight of her trust pressing softly against my palms. Every instinct in me screamed caution, yet every fiber of my curiosity, every whisper of desire to know her, urged me to move forward. "You can read it," she said, her voice low and calm, almost teasing, as she leaned just slightly closer. Her shoulder brushed mine in a moment so subtle I almost doubted it had happened, but I felt it, and it sent a shiver down my spine. There was a strange tenderness in the way she gave me permission, a careful balance between trust and provocation. It wasn't just an invitation to read, it was a test of connection, a silent challenge wrapped in warmth. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the diary, the pages crackling softly beneath my fingertips. The scent of her perfume, or perhaps the faint musk of paper and ink mixed with her presence, drifted up, making my senses more alive, more attuned to her. I could feel her eyes on me, not pressing, but steady and attentive, like she was reading me as I read her words. The first lines made me pause, not for the content, but for the intimacy of the act itself. I was holding her thoughts, her private reflections, the parts of her she didn't share with anyone. And yet, the permission she had given made the intrusion feel different, less wrong, more like a quiet bridge between us. I could feel the pull of her presence, a gentle gravity that made my chest tighten, my pulse quicken. She shifted slightly, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face, her hand lingering in the air almost by accident near mine. The motion was subtle, but it left a warmth behind, like a faint echo of touch. My gaze flicked up, and her eyes met mine, calm, steady, and teasing all at once. That look said everything she didn't need to say aloud. She trusted me, she wanted me here, but she was also aware of the delicate line we were treading. I turned another page, my breath catching slightly at the small, intimate details she had written, thoughts about quiet moments she cherished, small joys she rarely voiced, the way she observed life with such attentive grace. I realized I wasn't just reading her diary, I was stepping into her world, feeling the textures of her inner life brush against my own. Her presence was constant, quiet, comforting. Every now and then, her hand would move, just a whisper of a gesture, adjusting her position, resting lightly on the edge of the couch. Each movement was a punctuation to the rhythm of our shared silence, a subtle reminder of the closeness growing between us. I glanced up again, caught in the gravity of her eyes, and felt the undeniable pull. This was more than curiosity now. It was connection, slow and tentative, but real. And in that suspended moment, with the diary open and her so near, I understood that the line between them, between respect and desire, between hesitation and intimacy, was about to blur in ways I hadn't imagined. The words on the page pulled me in immediately, more than I expected. They weren't just sentences, they were fragments of her life, little brushstrokes of her soul painted in quiet ink. I read about mornings she cherished alone with a cup of tea, the way sunlight hit her favorite corner of the living room, the soft comfort of the worn blanket she kept on the couch. Small, seemingly mundane details, but each one carried a weight, a vulnerability that made her feel achingly human and achingly close at the same time. Her voice lingered in the spaces between the lines, not spoken aloud but present in every word. I could almost hear the slight hesitations, the gentle rhythm of her thoughts, the quiet longing beneath the surface. I felt a strange intimacy forming, not from touch, but from being allowed into a world she had never shared with anyone else. A passage caught me off guard. She wrote about fleeting loneliness, moments when the house felt too quiet, when life seemed to pass around her like a river she couldn't reach. My chest tightened at the thought of her in those moments, and I realized how much I cared, how much I wanted to reach through the pages, through the words, and simply be there for her. The diary had opened a window, and I was standing inside her world, feeling the pulse of her emotions as if they were my own. Every so often, I glanced up at her. She sat nearby, serene, a gentle smile playing on her lips, watching me navigate the fragments of her life. There was no judgment, only patience, the kind that made my heart ache with longing. I could feel her presence more acutely than ever, the warmth of her near proximity, the faint scent of her perfume, the way her shoulder moved with a subtle grace when she shifted. Even in silence, she communicated a trust that I had never expected, a quiet permission to connect with her in a way that felt sacred. I noticed the small gestures she made without thinking, fingers brushing the edge of the couch, a hand resting briefly on her lap, the tilt of her head as she watched me. Each one was a punctuation to the rhythm of the moment, a gentle reminder of the closeness growing between us. I felt a magnetic pull, subtle but undeniable, as though our hearts were drawing nearer in the quiet space the diary had created. Then came the confession of a secret hope, something she had never said aloud, the wish for someone to understand her, to see her in ways no one else did. My throat tightened as I read it, my hands clutching the diary a little too tightly, my pulse a little too fast. I realized then that I wasn't just reading words on paper, I was witnessing trust, and it was a gift. When I finally looked up, her eyes met mine, steady and inviting, with a warmth that made the distance between curiosity and intimacy disappear. The diary had done more than reveal her thoughts, it had revealed her. And in that moment, I felt the invisible threads of connection tighten around us, pulling us closer, quiet but potent, in a way that words alone could never describe. After a long pause, she spoke. Her voice was soft, measured, almost hesitant, but it carried a warmth that made my chest tighten. "You've read enough," she said, her gaze meeting mine with a steadiness that belied the vulnerability I could sense beneath. There was a quiet courage in her eyes, the kind that only appears when someone is about to share something deeply personal. My fingers still rested on the diary, but it no longer felt like a shield, it was a bridge, connecting us in ways I had only imagined. She shifted slightly, coming a little closer, though never pressing, never demanding. The faint brush of her shoulder against mine sent an involuntary shiver down my spine. Her hands rested gently in her lap, and yet the movement was intimate in its subtlety, the tilt of her wrist, the way her fingers flexed as if inviting me to reach out, to close the distance between us. I could sense her awareness of every heartbeat, every breath, and it made the silence between words electric. "I kept this diary for myself," she confessed, a hint of a smile playing at the corner of her lips. "But I also hoped someone might understand me someday. Someone who could see beyond the surface." Her eyes lingered on mine, and I felt the weight of her words settle over us like a soft, warm blanket. There was no hurry, no expectation, just honesty, and in that honesty, a quiet vulnerability that made me ache to be closer. I shifted slightly too, careful, tentative, yet drawn to her presence in a way that defied logic. The air felt charged, the quiet warmth of the room wrapping around us as though holding its breath. Her eyes softened, and a small laugh escaped her, delicate and intimate. "I suppose I trusted you enough to let you read it," she said. Her words were light, almost teasing, but there was an underlying seriousness that made me feel seen, noticed, and somehow, needed. The subtle gravity of her nearness was overwhelming. I noticed the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the quiet warmth of the room, the gentle rise and fall of her chest as she breathed. Without thinking, my hand drifted slightly closer, hovering near hers on the edge of the couch. She didn't pull away, instead, she shifted just enough for our knees to brush lightly. That tiny contact was enough to set my heart racing, enough to turn the shared silence into something more. We sat like that for a long moment, the diary resting between us, almost forgotten, while something unspoken passed in the space where our eyes met. There was trust, there was longing, and there was a slow, steady rhythm of connection that needed no words. In that quiet, intimate moment, I realized that what had started as mere curiosity had blossomed into something much deeper, a fragile, tentative, but undeniable emotional intimacy. Finally, she leaned back slightly, a contented sigh escaping her. "You understand me," she whispered, almost to herself. The words hung in the air, a quiet promise, a shared acknowledgement that this moment, small, slow, and tender, was the beginning of something neither of us had expected but both of us quietly longed for. The quiet lingered between us, soft and heavy with meaning. Her confession had settled into the room like a warm echo, one that refused to fade. I could feel her words still pulsing somewhere beneath my skin, "You understand me." Simple, gentle, and yet so powerful they left me breathless. The diary still lay open between us, its pages trembling slightly in the faint stir of air from the ceiling fan. My hand rested near hers, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her skin, but not close enough to touch. Every instinct in me wanted to close that distance, to reach for her hand, to tell her what I felt, but something held me still. Maybe it was respect, maybe fear of breaking something delicate and unspoken that had just begun to form. I turned my head slightly, watching her in the golden half-light. She was looking down, her expression soft and unreadable, her hair falling gently over one shoulder. The edges of her lips curved faintly, as though caught between a smile and a sigh. My heart beat unevenly. There was so much I wanted to say, but none of the words felt right. Anything too bold would shatter the calm we had built, anything too quiet would leave my truth unheard. She sensed my hesitation, she always did. Slowly, she lifted her gaze, her eyes meeting mine with a steadiness that stripped away all pretense. "You're quiet," she murmured. The corner of her mouth lifted slightly. "Thinking too much again?" I laughed softly under my breath, the sound shaky, unsure. "Maybe," I admitted. My voice came out lower than I expected, almost a whisper. "Just, trying not to ruin this." "Ruin what?" she asked, her tone warm but searching. I hesitated, then exhaled. "Whatever this is," I said, finally letting the words fall into the open air. "This moment. This, connection." Her expression softened. She leaned a little closer, her arm brushing mine, her touch barely there but enough to ignite something deep inside me. The warmth of her skin against mine was like a quiet pulse, steady and grounding. "You won't ruin it," she said softly. "Not if it's real." For a heartbeat, everything stilled. The light flickered gently on her face, the sound of our breathing the only rhythm in the room. I wanted to tell her everything, the curiosity that had turned to admiration, the admiration that had become something deeper, but words felt too small. So I just looked at her, letting my silence speak. Her hand shifted, resting lightly on mine. The contact was simple, innocent, yet it sent a quiet wave of emotion through me. My breath caught. There was no need for confession, the truth was already there, in the way her fingers lingered, in the way her eyes held mine. And in that suspended moment, I realized the choice wasn't about whether to act or retreat, it was about trust. Whether I trusted this fragile, unspoken bond enough to let it unfold. So I stayed still, letting her hand remain on mine, letting the silence stretch, letting the warmth between us say what neither of us dared to put into words. The afternoon sunlight had shifted, spilling softer and warmer across the floor, draping the room in gold. We still sat close, the diary resting between us but no longer the center of attention. Its pages had shared her inner world, and now something quieter, deeper, lingered in its place, a mutual understanding neither of us needed words to define. Her hand remained lightly on mine, not pressing, not demanding, just there, a steady warmth that anchored me. I could feel the gentle rise and fall of her pulse through her fingertips, hear the subtle rhythm of her breathing. Every tiny detail, the tilt of her head, the soft curve of her lips, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the warmth of the room, made the space between us feel intimate in a way that was safe, human, and profoundly moving. She tilted her head slightly, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear, her gaze lingering on mine. A small, knowing smile curved her lips, and I felt the quiet gravity of it, the unspoken reassurance that whatever fragile tension existed between us was now a thread connecting two hearts. For a moment, it felt as though time had slowed, letting us exist only in that suspended, gentle closeness. "I never thought I'd let anyone read this," she murmured, voice soft and reflective. "But I'm glad you did." Her hand gave mine a subtle squeeze, and the gesture carried a depth of trust and warmth that made my chest tighten. I squeezed back gently, letting the silent communication say what words could not. The room was filled with a quiet, comfortable peace, the kind that comes after a storm of unspoken thoughts has passed. We didn't need to speak, our connection was clear in the way we shared the same space, in the light pressure of our hands, in the lingering warmth of proximity. Each small gesture, the way her knee brushed mine as she shifted slightly, the way her eyes softened when they met mine, the gentle rise and fall of her shoulders as she breathed, was a language of intimacy, subtle yet unmistakable. I finally closed the diary, setting it gently aside, but it no longer felt like an object of temptation. It had served its purpose, revealing not just her thoughts, but the strength, warmth, and quiet vulnerability of the woman I had come to care for. My hand stayed near hers, brushing lightly as if unwilling to let the moment dissolve entirely. She laughed softly, a sound that made the room feel warmer still, and leaned slightly closer, resting her shoulder near mine. I felt the gentle steadying of her presence, the sense that this closeness was real, comfortable, and safe. The tension that had once hovered between curiosity and hesitation had melted into something slower, softer, and infinitely more satisfying. And as we sat there together, the diary forgotten but the connection enduring, I realized that the story wasn't about secrets, or boundaries crossed, or forbidden curiosity. It was about trust, about patience, and about the quiet, tender beginnings of something meaningful. Something that didn't need rushing. Something that simply needed time, presence, and the courage to feel. In that warm, sunlit room, we didn't speak further. We didn't need to. The silence held everything, understanding, desire, and the unspoken promise of more to come.